Here's a twist you didn't see coming. Imagine waking up to the news that Canada is now the 51st state of the United States. Sounds impossible, right? But in modern geopolitics, the unexpected is always lurking. Donald Trump once floated ideas that would rewrite the global map, declaring the Gulf of Mexico, the Gulf of America, and even entertaining the idea of acquiring Greenland. So, what if this improbable merger became a reality? And more importantly, what would this mean for the Caribbean? Hold on, the answers might surprise you. Geopolitical shockwaves. The Caribbean has long danced between US dominance and Canada's gentler diplomacy. Canada often serves as a counterbalance to American influence, bringing a softer touch to global discussions. If Canada became part of the US, that balancing act would vanish overnight. Suddenly, the Caribbean would find itself facing a single, larger superpower with amplified clout. Would this mean fewer voices advocating for fairer treatment in international agreements? Possibly. And then there's the issue of military presence. Canada's independent peacekeeping image would merge into the United States' more aggressive stance. That could reshape how security alliances play out in the region. This geopolitical shift could also force Caribbean leaders to reconsider their alliances. With Canada now a part of the US, would smaller nations in the region seek closer ties with China or the European Union as a counterbalance? The risk of becoming overly dependent on a single superpower might push countries to diversify their partnerships, introducing new diplomatic challenges. Economic ripples. Across the islands, Canada's economic footprint in the Caribbean is significant, especially in finance, trade, and development aid. For instance, the Canadian Seasonal Agricultural Workers Program provides opportunities for thousands of Caribbean workers. If US policies absorbed these programs, would they survive? Would the Caribbean lose out on beneficial trade agreements tailored by Canada, only to be funneled into the more rigid structures of US policies? It's a mixed bag. On one hand, a stronger economic powerhouse could open new markets for Caribbean exports, but on the other, US-centric regulations could erode the region's negotiating power, leading to less favorable trade terms. Beyond trade, Canadian investments in the Caribbean's banking and energy sectors play a vital role in regional development. Under US governance, these investments might shift focus or come under stricter regulations, disrupting financial ecosystems. Caribbean countries might have to adapt quickly to maintain stability, potentially negotiating directly with US-based companies to retain their economic foothold. The diaspora dilemma. Canada's Caribbean diaspora is a lifeline for many island economies. From remittances to cultural exchanges, these ties run deep. But as part of the US, the fate of this diaspora becomes uncertain. Immigration policies in the US are notoriously strict compared to Canada's relatively welcoming stance. Would these Caribbean families face tougher barriers to reunification? And what about maintaining cultural identity? The vibrant communities built in Toronto, Montreal, and Vancouver could face pressure to conform to a different social fabric. At the same time, the Caribbean might lose one of its strongest advocates in the international arena. Canada's diaspora communities often amplify the region's voice, lobbying for aid, investment, and cultural preservation. With those communities absorbed into a larger US framework, their influence might dwindle, leaving the Caribbean with fewer champions abroad. Cultural shifts and identity. Let's talk about something that hits closer to the heart. Culture. Canada's embrace of multiculturalism has been a safe haven for Caribbean traditions. Whether it's carnival celebrations or Caribbean literary festivals, these spaces thrive in Canada's unique cultural mix. Under US influence, would this heritage be preserved or diluted? The stakes are high. Losing these cultural platforms could weaken the connection between the Caribbean and its diaspora. Caribbean artists, writers, and performers who found a welcoming stage in Canada might face new challenges breaking into the US market. The loss of platforms like Toronto's Caribana could stifle the cultural exchange that has long strengthened ties between the Caribbean and North America. Climate and environmental fallout. Canada's leadership in climate initiatives has been a boon for the Caribbean, funding programs to combat rising sea levels and extreme weather. But let's face it, the US doesn't exactly have the best track record on climate change. If Canada's policies were to align with US priorities, Caribbean nations could lose a critical partner in their fight against environmental challenges. Would this shift mean less funding for renewable energy projects or climate resilience programs? The implications are as chilling as they are far-reaching. Caribbean nations, already vulnerable to hurricanes and rising sea levels, might find themselves scrambling to replace Canada's support. The region's environmental future could hinge on how well it adapts to this new reality, potentially seeking alliances with other nations to fill the gap. The big bonus facts. Here are 4 fascinating twists in this hypothetical scenario. Number 1. The world's second-largest nation. If Canada and the US merged, the combined landmass would total nearly 19.8 million square kilometers, making it the second-largest country in the world after Russia. Imagine the logistical nightmare of managing that. Number 2. The economic supernova. Together, Canada and the US would create an economy worth over $25 trillion. For context, that's nearly a quarter of the global economy. The Caribbean would need to navigate this economic powerhouse carefully. Number 3. Tourism explosion. With easier travel policies, Caribbean destinations could see a massive influx of tourists from both the US and Canada. But would local infrastructures be ready to handle such a boom? Number 4. Shift in global alliances. A US-Canada merger could spark a realignment of global power. How would China, the EU, or even CARICOM react to this new geopolitical giant? It's a question worth pondering. So, what does this all mean for the Caribbean? The potential annexation of Canada by the US is more than a geopolitical fantasy. It's a scenario that forces us to think about global power dynamics and their ripple effects on smaller nations. The Caribbean's economic, cultural, and environmental future could change dramatically. Whether these changes would bring more opportunities or challenges is anyone's guess. But one thing is clear: the islands would need to adapt quickly to thrive in this brave new world. Please subscribe to our channel today if you haven't already done so. You can also check out other videos on this channel, impacting Jamaica.